Okay, welcome to the RAAC Training Institute and our 2022 Spring Safety Series. Today's session is focused on professionals having an intentional conversation about when caregivers are at their wits' end and preventing tragedies of homicide and suicide. So I want to start us off by just saying a trigger warning. We do talk about some very important but deep topics, so please take care of yourselves. As you hear things that we talk about today, if you notice yourself getting overwhelmed or having some intense and big feelings, please do what you need to do to take care of you. On here, you'll notice the text home to 741-741, the text crisis line, or the national call-in hotline number, 1-800-273-8255. So want to at least say that before we even begin anything, because priority is you being safe and taking care of you. Otherwise, my name is Ann Tapia, and I am the coordinator for the Regional Autism Advisory Council. I'm very excited about this safety series. We kicked off on Monday with a family-focused conversation around this topic, and y'all are in for a treat because this is really important and powerful stories and messages and strategies that are being shared with you all today. So I'm very glad that you are here. We are going to ask that you keep yourself muted and turn your cameras off during the session. We will have time for chatting questions in. So if you think of something, please go ahead and chat it in as you think of your questions or comments. And if it's a clarifying point, we will go ahead and interrupt our speakers for those, but otherwise we're going to ask those questions toward the end. I know many of you had questions in your registration process, and our speakers have those questions. Some of them will be addressed in the midst of their presentation, but if we don't directly answer them, then we'll make sure we get them in the Q&A. So please use the chat for your questions and comments. We are recording this session. And you'll receive the link for that recorded version of it after the fact. So you'll get it by email, and then it will also live on the RAAC website. So you'll have access to that. It will be there after the fact. So again, if you do need to step away for a moment to take care of yourself, please know you can always go back and watch the recording. I will also drop a link at the end of the session to complete an evaluation, and I'll email that out as well. If you're looking for a certificate of attendance, I'll need you to complete that evaluation to let me know that you want that. It is a 2-page survey. Sometimes people only fill out the first page with the feedback, but then you don't tell me who you are, so I can't give you your certificate of attendance unless you do that second page. So make sure that you click the done button, not the next button, before you log off on that. And expect about a week follow-up for those certificates of attendance. You are welcome to tell us about you. We know that most folks here are professionals, but we'd love to know a bit more about who you are. If you want to chat that in the chat box, your name and role or organization that you're affiliated with. And we would love to have you join us for more of these RAAC safety series. So this is our first topic, but we have 3 more. So on April 18th, on Monday, we'll have Family Engagement, the Key to Resilience, where we will talk about how we can buffer trauma, anxiety, and challenging behavior through resilience factors. Also, providing some supports and how we can manage when things get difficult. On April 28th, we'll talk about preventing emergencies in the home and specifically elopement, how we can use technology and other prevention strategies to reduce runaway, wandering, and escaping. And then on May 3rd, we will wrap up with Alert and Aware, 30 seconds is all it takes, where we want to talk about how we can prevent abuse, neglect, and accidental harm from providers, whether that's a paid provider or a caregiver. We recognize that sometimes things escalate from the caregiver standpoint, and we want to help make sure people are safe. Part of that will include demystifying what some of our systems do in these kinds of scenarios. So how can you use our systems in ways that will help prevent tragedies rather than a reactive approach. And then of course, resources. Everyone will receive a resource catalog. We have that going. We have not yet released it because we're still gathering some additional resources, but the first version of that will go out next week, and we'll keep adding based on these other topics, resources that we will share with you all in a virtual catalog. And then, of course, I'd love to have you join us in other RAAC efforts. The Regional Autism Advisory Council is more than training. We do a lot of other activities, really thinking about how we can bring folks together in the autistic community to share resources and network with one another. And we identify big gaps in our community, and we try to figure out ways that we can address those gaps by working together as a collective whole and support our community through collaboration. So I would love to have you at that table because we need you. We need everybody who has good ideas and questions to be part of those conversations. And you are welcome to find out more about that by emailing me, going to the website, or connecting through any of the social media channels there, the Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. So let me stop sharing. We are going to get started with our amazing presenters. We're going to kick off with Lisa Morgan. I'm going to tell you a bit about everybody on our panel first, and then I will pass it to you, Lisa. So Lisa Morgan is an autistic advocate for crisis supports for the autism community. She has a master's degree in
You just mute. Yeah.
Sorry about that. And so Lisa is a board certified autism specialist. She is the founder and co-chair of the Autism and Suicide Committee of the American Association of Suicidology. Lisa coaches newly diagnosed autistic adults and presents workshops on suicide and crisis supports for autistic people through her consulting business, Lisa Morgan Consulting, LLC. We also have Jen Jordan, who will present next. Jen Jordan co-hosts the Jeff and Jen morning show on Q102. She's the proud mom of Jacob, who is on the autism spectrum. Since he was diagnosed at 3.5, Jen has been his biggest cheerleader, advocate, and overall fan. Jacob is now 20, and he started his own greeting card business, Cards by Jacob. He designs cards, calendars, hoodies, and coloring books. They're very cool. You should definitely check them out. They also have a podcast together at Home with Autism. They find all the fun things that they do at #@HomeWithAutism. And Eric Metzger. Eric is with Hamilton County Developmental Disabilities. Eric is the director of A-Life, which stands for, what it stands for. Eric, will you unmute and tell me what it stands for?
It's just advocacy, life course planning, inclusion, and family engagement.
The short version of that is Eric is an out-of-the-box thinker that helps people figure out how they can be connected to the community, and regardless of whether somebody is connected to the Hamilton County Developmental Disability Services system or not. So Eric and his team do some amazing work, and we're excited to have him share some ideas about community building today. Thank you, all of you panelists, for being part of this conversation. I will pass it to Lisa to get our conversation started.
Thank you. I'm going to share screen. Pull up my PowerPoint. Thank you. It's nice to be here. I'm going to start by sharing my story. I'm an autistic adult who in 2015 lost my husband he died by suicide. And that's kind of what got me into being an advocate for crisis supports for autistic people. So I had been away from my house for a while, and I got a call from a neighbor saying the police were at my house to do a wellness check on my husband, and they needed my keys to get in. So I went there, and this is kind of going to just show how autistic people can experience help by well-meaning professionals who are helping but kind of unintentionally harm. So I gave the keys to the police, and they kind of directed me where to stand in front of my garage doors where I would be safe while they went inside to do the wellness check. What they didn't know was, with my sensory issues, and I have an acute sense of smell, I found out and realized standing there by myself, my husband was dead just on the other side of the garage doors and had been for a few days. And so when the police came back outside, they surrounded me very quickly, again, to keep me safe from running back into the house after hearing their news. But it completely overwhelmed me, and I went right down and sat on the ground in the driveway, and I'm sure they thought it was their news, but it was actually them surrounding me. And then one of them put their hand on my shoulder, and I felt that hand on my shoulder for months when I thought about that moment, because it came out of nowhere. I didn't know, I didn't expect it. It was really kind of heavy. I didn't know what it meant. And at the same time, the lights, there were lights, there was heat and humidity. It was Florida. There were crowds of people. There were questions. And people were trying to just really help. There was a victim advocate who didn't know that giving me all kinds of information about community services, which was really nice, was depleting my energy and just raising my anxiety. As well, she wanted me to interact with her therapy dog, but I'm a cat person and that wasn't working out very well. And she wanted me to sit in her car, but I needed to pace to keep my anxiety down and to regulate. And so we kept missing each other as far as them giving me support and me trying to let them know what I needed. I ended up feeling very, very unregulated and very high anxiety. And it ended up to be just a night where I felt so unsupported. And when they gave me the keys to my house and everyone left, I felt completely, profoundly alone and misunderstood. And the reasons why is because there's a difference of culture between autistic people and non-autistic people and what they need. So for a non-autistic person, and sure, some autistic people most likely as well, but for most autistic people, the first responders were just, the help just didn't reach what I needed. I'm sure non-autistic people would feel that it was helpful. They would feel comforted by all the, community services they might be able to use when interacting with the therapy dog. They probably felt supported with all the people around, and they weren't, probably didn't feel alone, and they felt understood and could probably communicate a little bit better than me. And that would allow all those people there that night would allow opportunities for connection and help. But for me, it just didn't work out that way. I was misunderstood about what I needed. I had difficulty regulating my emotions. I was on sensory overload. My anxiety was, so high. I couldn't make eye contact. I thought people were going to think I was lying. I just ended up alone with no support. So autism is a neurodevelopmental condition, and we have a different brain structure. We have a different brain neurocircuitry type of functioning. We have a different operating system. We see and experience the world differently than non-autistic people. So some of the challenges we have as autistic people, of course, when you meet one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, and everyone's different on the spectrum and has different levels of abilities and challenges. But for the most part, we do have some shared neurology. And the challenges, it's really good to know what they are. So when you're supporting an autistic person, you can truly support them. So there's social communication difficulties, sensory issues. Change is very difficult, and my whole life just kind of blew up and changed that night. Understanding social nuances, gestures and nonverbal body language is a bit difficult. We tend to be very literal thinkers. Some cognitive inflexibility, which goes along with change being very difficult. Difficulty making eye contact, high anxiety, perseveration. So it's difficult to sometimes get away from having a negative, ruminating and thinking about a negative experience or a negative even thought. And then there's a slow processing speed. So we kind of need more time to answer questions and realize what's going on and kind of catch up with what's happening. The strengths are really good to use too. when you're supporting autistic people, to know use their strengths when you are able to support an autistic person. We tend to be very detail oriented, empathetic, even though we might show it in a different way, tend to be honest to a fault. Sometimes that gets us into trouble. We have a need for fairness, and that can be used to support an autistic person and to understand them as well. Intense passions can help to stop some of that perseveration and rumination if that's what's happening. We tend to be loyal, have a unique thought process, which is really good for problem solving and thinking outside of the box, a good work ethic, and tend to be very creative. So some risk factors for autistic people. The risk factors for the general population all go as well, but there have been found through research, there's been some unique risk factors for autistic people, such as co-occurring psychiatric conditions. There was a study done, a national study done in Denmark, which showed that out of the people that it was a very, very big study too, out of the people that they participated in the study, out of the ones that attempted and or died by suicide, 90% of those autistic people had co-occurring psychiatric conditions, mostly depression and anxiety. Lack of social support because of the social communication challenges is a unique risk factor. Unmet support needs, and that can go from housing to employment to just having a relationship, having a friendship, being understood, having access to medical and or mental health care that really truly works and from people who understand autism. The number of unmet support needs is really the risk factor. And then camouflaging or masking. So camouflaging and masking is a safety strategy that we use to fit in and to not stand out as different. And what happens is we don't really understand, we don't get known for who we are as people, and because we're masking to being somebody else. A late diagnosis is also a unique risk factor because of all the negative situations that have happened, negative experiences that have happened socially, until you get diagnosed and understand better. Being female, and autistic burnout, which is when life's demands overrun the coping skills that you might have. So there are some unique risk factors for autistic people that have an intellectual disability as well, which is prior psychiatric hospitalization, comorbid physical disabilities that go along with that, loneliness, sadness, and depression and anxiety. So masking is, again, it's a social strategy to fit in. And the reason why it's such a risk factor for suicide for autistic people is we're not known for who we are. What it is we mimic social interactions. So we suppress our aspects of our autism. We might not stand, we might kind of just take the sensory things that we're experiencing, bright lights, painful sounds, temperature, crowds of people, and we'll just kind of suppress them and we'll ignore them. At the same time, we're trying to pay attention to what's happening. We're trying to get into a conversation, and our processing speed is most likely kind of slow because we're trying to do those other things and suppressing our autism and ignoring the sensory stimulation. And we're trying to think about what to say next. And a lot of times what happens is we miss what's going on. And so we have to catch up again because the conversation has moved on and we can't keep track of the topic. It does help us to feel safe. It is less authentic. We're not really known for who we are. So when we reach out for help as we're masking, we also don't get the help that we need as well. it can get really confusing and it's very exhausting. So warning signs unique to autistic people. There is a resource using the warning signs of the general public to its considerations to take when assessing autistic people using the warning signs of the general public. It's the pre-downloadable off of the AAS website. Then there's a warning signs of suicide for autistic people. This is a proposed set of warning signs for autistic people made from a team of international researchers, clinicians, and autistic people. And these would be true warning signs for autistic people. So sudden and increased withdrawal. Autistic people use withdrawal as a coping technique for self-care. So if it's more intense or increased and people don't regulate and they can't do the rest of their day as well like they usually do, that's a cause for concern. No words to communicate acute distress. A lot of times when autistic people who are usually articulate and they are verbal and they get into a crisis, they lose their words and they look calm and they appear calm. So somebody who is all of a sudden not able to speak when they normally would be able to, they might be in a crisis for suicide, and it's something to investigate, definitely. Even though they present calm, they may not be okay. A current traumatic event could put someone into a crisis situation. And for autistic people, a traumatic event doesn't necessarily mean something really bad has happened. Sometimes it's something that non-autistic people feel is benign. Say somebody lost a friend, you know, that kind of happens to everybody, but for an autistic person, that might be the only friend that they have. And it's not easy to make more friends. So that could be very traumatic and a big loss. Marked increase in rate or severity of self-harm, because a lot of autistic people do self-harm, but a change in that can be a warning sign of suicide. Worsening anxiety or depression. Also a new focus on death-related topics that are not a special interest, because I did know somebody who had a special interest in suicide. They had gone to it was a little kid too, about 6 years old. He had gone to church with his family, and somebody stood up to give a testimony and they described in detail their attempt, and this little autistic boy just became his special interest, and he talked about it, and he talked about it, and he talked about it. And we finally had to just sit him down and talk and ask him, investigate a little bit more, because there have been kids as young as 5 who have taken their own lives. So perseverative suicidal thoughts and ruminations. These are warning signs of suicide for autistic people, because those thoughts can be stuck in our minds. We could be doing other things and that thought is still kind of ruminating and perseverating in the back of our minds all the time. And it's really hard to get that thought out and shift the thoughts. Using a special interest passion that somebody has could possibly get them to shift the thoughts to more positive ones so they can start regulating and start moving forward. Seeking means of making plans for suicide or suicidal rehearsal as well. People have been found to have really researched how to do it. And there's unfortunately a lot of websites out there that would have that information. Statements about no reason for living or no sense of purpose in life. A lot of people feel like they don't belong. And so it's really, really needs to be investigated as far as what they're talking about when they say that they don't belong or that they just don't want to be here. So investigating and talking and really finding out what an autistic person means is going to be very, very important. And then hopelessness is another one. This resource, Crisis Supports for the Autism Community, again, available for free download off of the AAS website. This one talks about communicating and identifying if you're helping somebody who's autistic that may not disclose their autism. And it also just really talks about how to communicate with an autistic person in crisis. So if some of the identifying ones is expresses difficulty with sensory issues, plus that also is going to be happening if they're in a crisis situation. Skills can regress. The sensory issues can be really stronger than normal. They may present with opposite emotions. So someone may be laughing if you're working with somebody on a crisis line, or you're in person with them. That doesn't mean that they're not in crisis. It just means they might be expressing their emotions differently. So really listening to what they're saying instead of how they're presenting is really, really big in helping autistic people in crisis. They may have difficulty identifying or verbalizing their emotions. And alexithymia is the inability to understand and express your emotions. A lot of autistic people have it, although it's not an aspect of autism, but they may just not even feel an emotion, or they may be crying and not knowing why they're crying. They may have a headache or something, but not feel that emotion, or feel an emotion and not be able to say what it is. That's also identifying, and knowing that will help to support them. Again, in identifying features in inability to make or sustain friendships, which could also put them in crisis. They may use echolalia, which is repeating words and sounds and phrases. And that can get kind of tricky, because if you're working with them in person and they keep imitating somebody's last few words, it can look like they're taunting, possibly, if you don't understand autism and echolalia. So it would be important to know that that's actually something that helps and can calm down and help to regulate. And they may just not know how to cope or what to do with emotions. So also understanding that there may be a history of countless misunderstandings and miscommunications throughout their lives. It can put somebody into a crisis, and it could be, something that had put them into a crisis. It could be their fifth or sixth in that day of misunderstandings and miscommunications. It happens a lot. Also, using odd pitch, tone, or pace, or robotic, that's part of being autistic. It also can give somebody the wrong idea if they don't understand that. Verbal or text response time, if you're working with a crisis line in person or on a crisis text line, it can vary according to processing speed. And when you're in a crisis, the processing speed can be slow. So giving time for them to answer, giving time for them to think and process an answer is helpful. And that perseverating and ruminating on thoughts, situations, and circumstances, it's really huge. It's really difficult for them to shift those thoughts and change those perceptions, but giving them time as well to do that, trying to talk to them about something, trying to find out their special interest. Autistic people can also be very literal in communicating, and that's going to be very important when supporting somebody in a crisis, saying the right thing. So if somebody says they're in a pickle, that means they're in a tricky situation. But an autistic person would most likely think of this, somebody in a pickle, and very literal, right? So it's also really, really important. So it's important to use literal speech when supporting autistic people in crisis, but it's so very important to listen to them literally as well. So back to that not being able to communicate when somebody gets into a really, deep crisis and they lose their words. This has happened to me before. I have been in a crisis. I've been trying to talk to somebody. I'm pretty articulate, and I got calm as I went further and further into a crisis situation. I got calm. I was presenting fine. And what I said was, I don't have any words. And what I was told was, oh, okay, well, when you're ready to talk, just let me know, or we can talk about this another time, that's fine. But that, I didn't say I didn't want to talk anymore. What I said was I don't have words. So I wasn't listened to literally, and I wasn't helped. I was missed. So, and as far as using literal speech, if you're trying to help somebody who's in crisis and you ask them, do you want to hurt yourself? Or do you want to, die by suicide? They may say no because they don't want to, but they may be planning to. And so you have to ask the right thing. You have to ask, are you planning to? Are you going to? Literally ask what you want the answer, for the information that you're looking for. So autism and filicide. In the past 5 years, over 650 children with disabilities were killed by parents, relatives, or caregivers. And the thing with autism and filicide is that the murders were seen as justifiable. Actually, the perpetrators were given sympathy and empathy, and the victims were actually these children were being disregarded and blamed for being murdered because of their disabilities. The perpetrators were given even lighter sentences than caregivers, parents, and relatives who had killed children without disabilities. So it seemed like our society's reaction to filicide of children with disabilities reflected our society's belief about disability. So preventing filicide, what can you do to help prevent filicide, is to change the conversation. Change the conversation from, kids with disabilities don't really need, aren't worthy, or they deserve it, or, just change the conversation to, everyone's life is worthy. Everyone's life is worth something and worth living. Prosecute to the fullest extent of the law, and don't have it be different for kids with disabilities. Also, end ableism, which is, just not accepting people with disabilities, and that they can do what they can do and be a productive person in society. And definitely, if self-report, if you're a caretaker or family member and you're feeling that way, encourage families and caretakers and relatives to self-report. It's so much better to get into that position. It's almost like reaching out for help if you're feeling suicidal. And then community reporting. So, encourage, if somebody sees something or hears somebody talking about, being overwhelmed and thinking about, doing filicide, then they would report. So some final thoughts is that all behavior is communication. Verbal and nonverbal are only 2 ways to communicate. All behavior is communication. Somebody trying to express themselves to somebody else. Suicide, ideation, alexithymia, and impulsivity. These 3 things together are really a dangerous combination for a person in crisis. Suicide ideation is mental rehearsal, thinking about suicide, ruminating on it, just being stuck in your head. And then alexithymia, sometimes you can't feel those big, strong emotions that kind of clue you into being in a crisis and feeling like you need to get help. Sometimes you don't feel anything, and sometimes you just don't know what you're feeling. And then impulsivity, that is, kind of like the last thing in this trio, and it's a very dangerous combination for a person in crisis. And then making a difference. Autism is a culture. We think differently. We express ourselves differently. We communicate differently. So accepting autistic culture, so we don't have to mask. If we need to stim in public, it's okay. It's socially acceptable. All of those things will make a difference in helping somebody to not get to that point to where they're in a crisis situation. Here's a chart again about alexithymia, because I think it is so, so important. I guess because I've experienced it myself. I was in a crisis situation. I did not know to what point I was, because I do have alexithymia. And I reached a point without having any emotion at all, and walked into my kitchen and broke my hand on my kitchen table very impulsively. I didn't even think twice about it. The emotions just came flooding in, and I had to do something to try to stop them. They're very, very strong. When you're not feeling something and all of a sudden you are, and it's huge and you can't communicate, this is a difficult situation to be in. And that is it for me today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We will pass it to Jen, which both of your stories I feel like weave together so well. So thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. Great information. So I have a son named Jacob. He is now 20 years old. He was diagnosed at 3.5 with, at the time, the terminology was severe autism. And I had the typical response that most moms have upon diagnosis, just an overwhelm, every emotion that you can imagine, and feeling very lost, very alone, and not knowing what to do. Well, shortly after his diagnosis, I was introduced to another mother who had a son about 1.5 years older than Jacob. And the first thing that I noticed about her was that she had makeup on and her hair was done, and it looked like she'd actually brushed it sometime in the last 2 weeks. And she didn't have any roots from, not getting it colored for multiple months. And she was well dressed. Her whole outfit, it matched. She had shoes on that had a heel. She had a pedicure. She was in good shape. She had a nice figure. You could tell she was taking really great care of herself. She had this huge, inviting smile. She was so warm. She was so welcoming. She was like, welcome to the club. Here we are. And she had all the answers. Like, I didn't know where to go, who to talk to, what to do next. She knew the paperwork that needed to be filled out. She knew where I needed to open up bank accounts. She had every answer to every autism question that any of us could come up with. And we ended up becoming a group of autism moms. There were a whole bunch of us that became really, really tight friends. And my friend, Terry, who had all the answers, was our leader. She was the one that we all went to when we needed help and assistance and advice. She was also a foster mother who ended up adopting a little girl. She had her son with autism, another son, and then she adopted a baby who at birth was addicted to drugs. She fostered animals. She took care of horses. I mean, mind-blowing. We all looked to her like, she's pulling it off. She's making it happen. This is who we aspire to be like. And we also felt like, if she can do it, maybe I can too. At some point, things just started being off with Terry. Terry started to struggle, seemingly out of nowhere, to us anyway, because as far as we could see and tell, she had a perfect marriage. Her husband decided that he wanted a divorce. And Terry did not handle this well at all. She started drinking heavily. She started having these emotional outbursts that were so very uncharacteristic for her. It was startling to us, like, this is something's going, this is different. Something is going on. We started getting calls. I would get a call from her mom at 10 o'clock at night, and her mom would be sobbing, and she'd be like, she's really, really drunk, and she's threatening to hurt herself, and I don't know what to do. It got to the point where her very best friend and I were having lengthy phone conversations about what can we do? How can we support her? Is she really serious? Could she really hurt herself? Is she capable of that? How afraid should we be? Are there steps that we can take? Can we have her institutionalized? Is that something you can even do? We were really out of our territory and out of our ability to handle and manage what was going on with her. We didn't know. The last conversation I had with her best friend was on Wednesday night. On Friday, lunchtime, I was at the Macy's shoe department, and my phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was her sister. She said, Jen, she said, I'm at the hospital. Terry's dead. She hung herself in mom's basement. Of course, she's sobbing hysterically. And I just walked out of Macy's, I don't even remember the drive home. I remember the next few hours though, because her sister asked me to call all of our friends and let them know what happened. I always notice when there are stories like this of a parent who does this to themselves, or if they make the choice to take their children with them, how angry other parents get and people get. How could she do that? What a horrible thing to do. That's so selfish and cruel, and what a horrible person. And I always listen really, really closely. Because I believe that what looks like anger is actually fear that maybe it could happen to us too. You know, Terry was the one that we all aspired to be. If it could happen to her. And while the way that Terry did it, and all of the typical, you know, when you hear of someone committing suicide, you know, it's 3 or 4 different acts that come to mind. But I would submit to you that there are a lot of ways for us to kill ourselves, socially acceptable ways. Like, how do you live? Do you drink, smoke, take drugs? What are you taking medications for? What caused the conditions that those medications are for? What do you eat? Do you exercise? How do you sleep? How do you take care of yourself? How do you self-medicate? I think these are things that we need to look for in our families and caretakers. How are they taking care of themselves? Because while on the outside, they may seem to be doing just fine, they're drinking every night, which I know those who do. I know those that take a lot of pain pills for a bad back. I know those who can sit down and eat an entire cake in one session. If I'm going to be transparent, I take meds for GERD, acid reflux, high blood pressure, and segmental colitis. All of that is from the foods I have chosen to eat. Stress, sedentary lifestyle. I quit a 20-year cigarette habit 13 years ago. I've been on and off anxiety and depression medications for 26 years, currently off for 3.5. I have a sugar addiction that if I don't make changes, and I have recently, but if I don't maintain those changes, I'm knocking on the door of a type 2 diabetes diagnosis. I recently quit weed. We'll see if that one sticks. I do have my medical card for the colitis. So I have also been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and PTSD. So other ways of killing yourself, I am familiar. So after Terry died, let's fast forward 5 years. Jacob is 11. For 7 years, I had been getting a car from work to drive for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And for the first 6 years, Jacob was totally cool with me bringing home a car, a different car other than our car to drive around. For whatever reason, lucky number 7 year, he wanted absolutely no part of this beautiful white car that I brought home. And he made me painfully aware of it, kicking and screaming and crying and yelling anytime we had to go anywhere, and kicking and screaming and yelling and crying at home constantly about no white car, green car back, mom get green car back, mom no white car. And I couldn't figure out, what it was about the car. And I did my share of investigating. I don't know, did it smell funny? Was there a sound that was assaulting his sensory issues? Was it that he had it set in his mind that I wasn't getting it for another week, and because it came early, it was screwing up his entire schedule that he had set in his mind? I couldn't figure out what it was. All I know was he was suffering greatly, and his suffering was sure causing me a lot of suffering as well. We were a bag of a mess is what we were. And after about a week of this relentlessness, we were driving on 275, and I came to a big overpass, and he is in the backyard, and he is kicking and he is screaming and he is yelling just as loud as he can. No white car, all done white car, mom get green car back. And you know what? I lost it. Very, very weak moment. I cranked up the radio to try to drown him out, just made him scream even louder. I rolled down the window and just nothing was working. And I just snapped. I'm like, enough. We're driving the white car. There's nothing wrong with this car. I don't know why you're having such a problem with this car, but I'm done. I'm over it. Just stop. And in that moment, I looked at the overpass and I had this thought. It would be so easy for me to just drive this car off this overpass and be done. Because what's going on here in this car is beyond the type of hard than what I can handle. And if this is how my life is going to be for the rest of my life, because I'm going to be taking care of him for the rest of my life until the day that I die, I can't do this. I want my life back. When do I get my life back? I'm not going to. And I was just flooded with other thoughts all along those same lines. And it's like, it would be so easy just to. But I didn't. Because there was one thing that I did differently than my friend Terry. One thing that kept me on the road. I questioned the thoughts that I was having. Is my life going to be like this every day for the rest of my life? No. Things are never going to change. That's not true. The only thing constant is change. He has changed so much from the child he was a year ago. He's going to continue to change. I'm going to continue to change. So no. I'm never going to get my life back. What does that even mean? My life is my life. Every day. I have choices every day to create the life that I want within the life that I have. And so being able to stop and pause and question those thoughts, I realized that the thoughts I was thinking weren't true. And so my solution to all of these problems that I believed were occurring that actually weren't. That's not what I wanted. The thing about belief systems is they drive every single decision that we make and every single experience that we have. Our thoughts have no power unless we believe them. And here's the thing, how do we know if we believe our thoughts if we don't ever question them? Most of them aren't even ours. They're thoughts that and beliefs that we pick up from childhood. Most of our belief systems are in place. 95% are in place by the time we are 8 years old, and we don't ever even question them because we're never taught to. You know, beliefs about how you should behave, how kids should behave, what a spouse should do, right and wrong ways to do things. I mean, our days are filled with reactions to beliefs of how we see the world. So there's so much power in that pause when we stop and we ask ourselves, is what I'm believing even true? See, Terry never paused. She believed every single thought that she was thinking, that she couldn't live without her husband. She couldn't do it by herself. There was no way that she could handle a life without him, and a life, you know, with a child who has all of these needs. You know, I can't speak to all of Terry's beliefs, but that's my guess of what was going through her head. I believe that, you know, for her to do what she did, she was feeling pretty hopeless, helpless, and powerless. And knowing that she could have turned back, all she had to do was put her feet down. And she did. So when we stop and we ask ourselves questions, important questions, you know, these questions that maybe we've never asked ourselves before, we have to think, we have to be present, we have to be aware of who we are and why we're here and what we want. If we're going to go beyond surviving this and actually thriving and finding joy and peace and calm, we have to pause. So I love questions. It's just, I love asking other people questions. I like asking people I know really well questions. I like asking complete and total strangers questions because I want to understand why people do the things that they do, because I believe that everybody has a really good reason for doing whatever it is they do, whether I understand it or not. But if I ask questions, then I can understand what motivates them. And so with my questioning, I realized I needed to start with myself. I really needed to get to understand the beliefs that I'm walking around carrying, and then question them whether or not I believe them. If I do believe them, great. Let's ask if they're working for me. You know? And then if it's a belief that I don't have, I can change it. Now, some beliefs are really, really embedded very, very deeply. So sometimes changing a belief is like flipping a light switch, and sometimes it's like dragging a 2-ton boulder through mud. But it's worth it if it's going to make life easier and better and more the life that I want to live. So here are some of the questions that I think are really, really important for us to ask to ourselves so that we can live the life we want to live in the life that we have. And I think that when you are dealing, like, I wish I would have had a really great grasp on the power of these connections and questions when Terry was really suffering. Because I think if I could have asked her to think about these things, and if I could have gotten her to think about these things, we may have had a different outcome. So I think the best place to start is with what do you value? What is most important to you? What in your life do you consider to be priceless? What, if you were just to make a list, just make a list of 3, 5, 10, 20 things, on my list. Alone time. I need alone time. I have to have alone time to get my thoughts together, to get centered, to get calm, so I can deal with the outside world. When I'm not getting that alone time, that's when shit starts to go a little bit sideways. That's when I lose my patience faster than I should. That's when I get really distracted with thoughts and, ruminating thoughts. It's when old thought patterns pop back in that maybe I've already questioned, but I'm so in the moment of the frustration and just the overwhelm that I can't think myself out of them in the moment. I need that alone time to take care of myself. Family, of course, is a huge value for me. Freedom, 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 because that's one thing that I will often go back to. This an old thought pattern. I'm not free to do what I want to do because I have all of these responsibilities. But freedom's an interesting thing because we always have freedom. We always have the freedom of choice to experience the experience we're having in a different way. So there's always, even in all of my responsibilities, there's freedom within them of how I choose to handle them and to deal with them. Number one on my list, because I do like to revisit my values frequently to see if anything has changed, have I come up with something new and different that I find really, really important. And always at the top of my list is laughter. I have to laugh. I have to find the funny in as many things as humanly possible, because I do think that we are meant to have a good time in this lifetime. And I think the challenges that are thrown at us are our opportunities to learn how to be light and to be filled with joy, no matter what's going on around us. So for me, laughter is important. And in the early years with Jacob, there was no laughter. It was intense. He was screaming and crying and kicking and yelling and hitting and tantruming and running away. He was doing all of the things. And I wasn't laughing. And it was hard. It was really, really hard. So I wanted to find that laughter with my kid. And how I did that was when he was almost 6 years old, was when I found a program that really, really worked for me. It's called the Sunrise Program. It's offered through the Autism Treatment Center of America. And one of the principles of the Sunrise Program, which is really a short description of the program, it's not easily described, but it is about joining the child in their world to build a bridge in the hopes that they will then cross the bridge back over into our world. And we do this with a very loving, accepting, and non-judgmental attitude. And everything that we do with our kid is filled with energy, excitement, and enthusiasm. So I had a playroom in my basement where we took all of the electronics out, any battery operated toys, no TVs, no laptops, no iPads, nothing, because no human can compete with electronics with a kid with autism. We have to work really, really hard to be more entertaining. And 99% of the time, we're going to fail. So we eliminated those completely. And what we did in the playroom was join him in his world. One thing that he loved to do is he loved to roll markers. He had 4 Expo markers, and he would roll them in the same order every single time: red, orange, green, blue. Every time, boom, 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 out of his hand, boom. And he would be completely exclusive and repetitive in this behavior, just completely zoned in. So I got my own 4 markers, and I'm like, okay, for whatever reason, I don't understand it, but this kid loves rolling these markers. To him, there's nothing better than this in this moment. So I got my own markers and I rolled them just like he did, across the table, and watched them fall, and across the table and watched them fall. And I became very, very present in that moment. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of cool. Maybe he's looking at the way it rolls and what it looks like with each color and the letters, how they roll. Maybe he likes the sound of the rolling. Maybe he likes the sound. And I just got into it as much as I could. And we would end up laughing. Like, who would think that rolling markers would make me laugh? But it did. Because in the moment I was being very present, loving him, accepting him, and just trying to be a part of his world. So I value that very much. I value my connection with my son. So we need to look at beliefs. So I'm going to give you some examples. What do you believe? See how these different beliefs about the exact same things can give you two completely different experiences. So core beliefs are your big ones. You know, these are your religious beliefs, your spiritual beliefs, the how the world works kind of beliefs. So how is your life experience if you're walking around believing the universe is out to get me versus the universe is benevolent? It's always there for me. It's there to hold me. It's there to keep me up, and it's there to take care of me. I'm not in danger here versus the universe is out to get me. If we hone in on just autism, because obviously you're walking around with an infinite number of beliefs, but if we hone in on autism, diagnosis as a whole, is it a tragedy or is it a gift? Your kid, he's never going to get any better, or he's capable of growing and changing. Your ability to handle, manage, cope. I can't do this, or I'll figure things out. So if you have friends or parents, listen for their belief systems. Figure out where they are. Are they living in a world where the universe is out to get them? They're constantly bitching about the lack of services. They're very upset at this teacher, this therapist. They're very mad that people don't see their kid. They're very mad. And, you know, all of these things, I'm not saying they're not true and they're not happening, but if that's where their focus is most of the time, keep an eye on them. Keep an eye on them. Family, community, world, they don't understand support or care versus they're doing the best that they can. It's going to get better the more they learn. Where autism came from. Vaccines are something environmental or a natural occurrence, a shift in consciousness. You could see those beliefs being played out in the autism community and how one side is getting very angry at the other side all the time. And the thing is, it might very well be a combination of both. But you can see how each one can affect how you live, how you experience. The future, things will be this way forever, or I have the power to create my experience. Then why you and your child are having this experience. We are being punished, or there is something wonderful for us to learn here. Of course, there's limited number of beliefs that you can have about every single one of those topics. I picked a couple that were extreme just to kind of give you an idea of what the different lenses are through which we have our experience in this world of autism. So some of my core beliefs, just to give you some examples if you're going to explore yours. I'm not saying everybody should have these. I'm just saying that these are mine. Everything happens for me, not to me. Exactly how it's supposed to and when it's supposed to. The universe does not make mistakes. The cause is in the future. I love this one because when something happens to me that I just don't understand, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, why is this? Jacob and I do this thing. Why is this happening to me? You know, kind of moment. It's like, okay, well, it doesn't make sense in this moment, but if I believe that the cause in the future, well, then maybe someday it will make sense. Good example. When I got fired from my last job in Tampa, I'd been working for this company for 11 years. I made them a lot of money. I was doing my job. I was doing it well. We were successful, but they decided they wanted to take the radio station in a different direction. And they just let us go after 11 years. And I'm like, they're just showing us out the door. I mean, they're not even trying to find us another job. I don't get this at all. Jacob was a year old at the time, and we got hired here in Cincinnati. Well, 2.5, 3 years later, we get his diagnosis. And looking at Florida, Florida had like no services for kids on the spectrum. They had like nothing. Cincinnati, miles and miles and miles ahead. So we ended up being in a place that was better for my kid. If I wouldn't have gotten fired, we wouldn't have had that. So I trust that the cause is in the future. I believe he's doing the best that he can. So am I, with the beliefs that we have. We can both change. All pain, all suffering is an invitation to grow, change, get better, and be better. So here's the thing with these beliefs. Once we really get to the beliefs that we want, and we have a bad day, week, month, year, if we can pause in the moment and remind ourselves, what do I believe? We ask ourselves, what do I value? And am I living my values? If not, how do I do that? Because I have to do that. That's going to keep me solid and grounded and sane. Another big question. Who do you want to be in this world? Who do you want to be as a mom or a dad, as a caregiver, as a therapist? Who do I want to be in my community, as a friend, as a family member? And who do I want to be for me? Who do I want to be for myself? So as a mom, I want to be loving, calm, curious, accepting, non-judgmental, fun, enthusiastic, and excited as much as humanly possible. That is how I want to show up as a mom. Jacob tests me. So most recently, the issue that we have, of course, I grew up with the belief that kids should never raise their voice to their parents. I have a kid who speaks very loudly in a monotone voice. So it always sounds like he's raising his voice to me and yelling at me. And when he gets a little worked up about something, the volume increases. So because I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and he is 20 years old and staying up later and later all the time, I do go to bed before him. And lately he has decided that he has questions for me after I've gone to bed, and I'm always just on the cusp of falling asleep, or I've just fallen asleep, and he storms in my room and with his very loud monotone voice asks me a question that is a question that he already knows the answer to. It's the same question that I have answered night after night for 7 or 8 years. And there's like a handful of them, right? Or if something new is, he couldn't find a sock one night and I had to get up out of bed and go get him a sock. And I'm just so frustrated because I don't sleep real great. I don't sleep a lot. So I want to sleep and I'm so tired. It's the end of my day. And I just, I feel the anger. And sometimes, depending on my hormones, it feels like pure rage, just like, kind of thing. And I have to pause because I don't want to be the mom that yells at her kid. I don't want to be the mom that makes him, I can't make him, but that causes him more stress. Because if I yell, I'm feeding into the energy of him being upset. It just gets bigger. And I don't want that. I want to be calm. I want to be loving. I want to be, so he's testing me. And it's a tough one to pass. And we're working to get to a point where he doesn't do that anymore. But on the nights that he does, I have to ask myself, who do I want to be? What kind of mom do I want to be? And then I know exactly what I need to do to be that mom. Other questions? What do you want to do? What do you want to have? What do you want to do treatment wise? I think that was something these were questions I was never asked. It's like, okay, how much time, effort, and money do you want to put into this? Because your possibilities are endless. I mean, you can make the choice to see one doctor, do whatever that doctor tells you to do, and put them in school. You can see every single doctor that you can find, take them to every single different therapy and intervention that you can find. You can spend no time. You could put all of your trust into the professionals and let them make the decisions. You can make 100% of the decisions. You can, it's endless, right? You can take all of your money and put it in a savings account so that they have this nest egg when it's time for them to go out on their own, or for when you're gone, or you can spend every little penny that you have on therapy now. You know, that was never really laid out to me. And how much do you want to learn? How much do you want to, how deep do you want to go in understanding your child and why they're doing the things that they're doing? You can just look at the behaviors and try to do things to treat the behaviors, or you can start digging for those root causes and find out, you know, is there something physiological going on here? What is their thinking process? Why is this happening? And every family is going to be different. And I think we see a lot of parents who maybe if they asked some more of those questions would have, if they could develop a deeper understanding and find more compassion for their kids and understand why they do the things that they do, and see that they do those too, just in different ways that may not be so obvious. They might gain a little more compassion and understanding and wouldn't get so angry and frustrated and helpless and hopeless. So autism, it really, in my experience, has been a heart and mind game. And asking these questions can really help keep my head on straight. And getting into the heart of it all, which these questions have the capability of doing as well. I happen to be somebody who leads with the head. There are 3 centers that drive us, our mind, our heart, and our gut, that we operate out of. And we have all 3, but each of us kind of leads with one. I lead with the mind. So I'm thinking first, and then I feel, and then I have gut instincts. So for me to get into the heart, and I think this is true for every single one of us, is connection is imperative. It's a must. If we are feeling disconnected from ourselves, our life, our children, our community, then that loneliness becomes helpless and hopeless. And this is where we can get ourselves into a whole lot of trouble. So working on maintaining connections with everyone that we possibly can is so good for our mental well-being. It is a necessity. And we're hardwired for it. And I think that's what makes autism so hard, is because that's what so many people with autism struggle to do, to connect. I know I felt completely disconnected from Jacob when he was a baby. I mean, he was an infant, he was a baby, and I would hold him and he would push me away. Like as a newborn, I was having that experience. He never cared, seemed to never care that I was in the same room with him. He didn't want to interact with me. And I would try everything. And as a mom, you know, have this belief that you're made to be a mom, and that nobody is going to love you more than your child. And then you have a child that doesn't want anything to do with you, and you can't even console them. You know, you try and nothing works. I mean, that really messes with your head. And so when I went out for the first time to the Autism Treatment Center of America and learned the Sunrise program, the first thing I did when I came home was find Jacob, and he was in the basement. We had one of those cocoon swings, you know, that you can bounce in and you swing in, completely hide yourself in. Well, he was sitting in it and he was just bouncing. He was a bouncer. He was a bouncer and a jumper. And what I was taught to do was always position yourself in a place that would make it very, very easy for the child to make eye contact with you. So I got down on the floor and I was down on my knees, just a little bit below him. And I started joining him. He was jumping and bouncing. So I was jumping and bouncing with the same level of enthusiasm that he was. And no talking, because he wasn't talking. So I wasn't making a sound. I was just like bouncing and really enjoying it. And he stopped. And he looked at me right in the eyes. And I said, "Oh, thank you for looking at me. I love those eyes. You have the most beautiful eyes. I miss those eyes. Thank you for looking at me." And his eyes got really, really wide. And he was still nonverbal at this point. And he just smiled and looked at me in a way as if to say, oh, hi, Mom. There you are. Looks like you're starting to get it. There was a connection there in that moment that I had never had with him. And I knew that I wanted more of that. And so that's when I made the connection, the relationship, the number one priority. Nothing is more important than the relationship. Trying new foods, not important than the new relationship. Sleeping in his own room, not more important than the relationship. Relationship first. Connections and relationships change everything.
And that
I
is oh, I'm sorry. I
No.
don't want to cut you off, but I was going to say this is a perfect segue for Eric's
Yep.
point.
It is.
Do you want to finish your thought? I'm sorry for
Yeah.
interrupting you.
I will give you one last statement because I think this is really, really important to consider. That I know all of this stuff that I talk about sounds like a lot of work, and it sounds like it's really, really hard work. I am going to suggest that living the way you're living with your pain and your suffering is really, really hard too. So here's an opportunity to choose your hard. Choose the hard that keeps you stuck, or choose the hard that sets you free.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Your story is so powerful. So I appreciate you sharing.
No, thank you.
And it, like I said, perfect segue to Eric and your message. Please jump right in, Eric.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Here we go. Of course, just before I went on, I have a cord that is now apparently shorting out. So I lost all of you and knew that any second, right, was going to be the moment when indeed I needed to be on the air. So, okay. So here we go. All right. I'm not going to read from this. I want everybody to know, we could do, my segment could be its own 2 hours. So I prepared this for you so that if you really care about the subject, it really is, I lay it out like a case. So that the first part is just kind of the bottom line. It's kind of like, I've done the homework for you, right? So you can read it and believe it and go, okay, or you can be a complete cynic. And on page 2, okay, all the evidence is there, okay? So if you have any doubt about which both are good, right? Take it and go, wow. And then, but if you really want evidence, because, now we're speaking particularly to the professionals where you need to be able to quote it, right? So the way I'm going to do this, I'm just going to take just a couple minutes and do it almost like just, a billboard almost is this. Think about, the topic, relationship saves life. So think about it. This is truly the microwave version. Think of it this way. We're going to do health and safety on one side and quality of life on the other. Okay, not that they're not related, but just in terms of sectors. Okay, so let's talk health first. All right, when people are isolated and lonely, this isn't just people with disabilities. When they're critically isolated or substantially isolated, so in other words, it can be a low level of isolation and loneliness over a long period of time, or it can be intense, right? Or it can be a short period of time where it's extremely meaningful to the person to be connected and they're not. The next statement applies. I did 1,400 pages of research about 2 years ago when we went into the pandemic, because I was already intensely concerned about loneliness as something that truly impacts people. It's not just a feeling, right? The overwhelming evidence from Oxford, from Stanford, from University in Beijing, I always forget the name, and all Harvard, Yale, everything was this. Listen to this. This is so well published. I need everybody to really understand it, because you won't believe it. And that is this: the impact on people that are truly lonely, as I defined earlier, has the same health impact as if they smoke 15 cigarettes a day. Now think about that. the same health impact. And so, well, how is that even possible? One's so obviously physical and the other. I'm not here to debate that now. I don't have the time. All right. It's in the research. Okay. So think about what that does. So that's one, and I could go on. That's one health aspect, right? Two. All right. Is from a safety aspect. I was the director of investigations for 8 years. In that time, we did about 15,000 significant UIs. And of course, all the MUIs are pretty serious. In that time, my most important piece of advice to providers that were investigating, to police that were investigating, to nurses that were investigating was this, but particularly to police and 241 kids, right? Is, think about, we serve 7,800 people with developmental disabilities in Hamilton County. And imagine, how many of those folks cannot effectively communicate for themselves. So my message to them was never take anything at face value. I don't care if you think you're an expert in DD or not. Make sure the most important thing. Now think about it, these are people, even if they're professionals in our field, if they don't know the person, you don't know the person, right? So if you don't have a good communication system, how you gonna? So what I used to say was never assume that the person can't speak for themselves, A, two, or communicate, but they may not be able to do it in a way that you'll understand. So get the most trusted person in that room with that person. And if they're not there, whatever you have to do it, make that happen. That is the most important. If you don't have the most trusted person. So imagine, because we all know this, right? If I go into a room and I'm not feeling the relationship between the staff or whoever's in the room, that person, and they don't have a communication system that I understand, already I know everything I need to know just by looking, right? So it is so incredibly important. So relationship saves life, because I have to talk to the person that's that person's interpreter. I call it what the president said, right? In a more funny way is like, I need to know if Joe is a 12-year-old kid with mental health issues, DD, cerebral palsy, and doesn't have a functional communication system. I need to know what he's telling me, because his words, is our guests have already articulated, our speakers have already articulated, may not mean what they say, right? I need to know that. It is life-saving. And police, I used to say, you're experts in assessing. Use those skills, use your eyeballs and say, man, something doesn't feel right here. Don't just go with whatever's being said, because of that literal factor that we talked about. And again, most trusted person, most important piece of advice. So when we talk about relationships, if that person is not in their life, that person is at risk of suffering and dying. I make no excuses for the boldness of these two comments. 15 cigarettes a day, and I don't have somebody I can trust to communicate with, kills the people we serve or causes them to suffer. And having done so many cases, this isn't happy, Eric. I love to be happy, Eric. I'm on the light side, which I'll go over to in a minute, but that is the reality. And it was the reality literally 60 seconds before I got on this call today to present with a person we serve. So, these are the things we do, right? Okay. So, and I'll say this, because why did the person call me? I'm not usually the go-to, is because we built trust a while back, right? Completely unexpected, but that's just the way it works, guys. That's the way it works. All right. So real quickly to quality. All right. This is another bold example. It's not one I love to use with families, but I'm going to use it with professionals. Okay. If you don't believe that loneliness and the lack of relationships affects people's life, and I have, a whole spiel on this, but I'll start with this one. El Chapo, you'll think I went off the grid here, but just bear with me. El Chapo, right, had, 400 some people killed, cartel guy, right? You have serial killers in jail. Do you know what their number one victory in appeals is? They appeal to the courts or to, the warden, because they're lonely. These are people that killed people, one after another. If we value serial killers so much that we provide them a win on appeals after they've killed. I don't know how many people you got to kill before you deserve to be alone for a little bit. But I use that extreme example to say it is unconscionable that people that we serve, that we allow them to be isolated and not have not really build friendships, not facilitate building friendships. That is not easy. I'm not putting that on us that we have to be successful all the time. Okay. What I'm putting on us is if you can argue morally, the worst people on the planet demand and get the rights to get relationships and be with people, then we should too. And so I'll ask this and just answer yourself, and I'll throw out an answer. How many people in the state of Ohio? So if we have 70,000 plus people in Ohio with developmental disabilities, what's the percentage of, we'll call it essential to critical loneliness among our population? Right. And I've asked this to over 4,500 staff. And I will tell you, usually I like to play the guessing game, but I'm just going to tell you straight out. It's 80 to 90%. It's 80 to 90%, depending on how you look at it, right? When you look now, that does not mean they don't live with people, or it doesn't mean that they don't have loving families. We're not talking about that immediate family. We're talking about bigger life, right? But when you start to look in the hallways at school, when you start to look in the cafeterias, when you look at on the bus, when you look at centers, and you really measure the quality of and ask, hey, is that person truly connected? Right. So relationship saves lives, because as we build relationships, it affects everybody. Last question I'll ask, how many of you have a go-to person then when the crap hits the fan, you can at least be heard? Now ask yourself, how many people outside the people we serve, families, do they have to go to do that? And I don't care if they have a completely internal system of communication, they still need somebody. So that's my spiel, right?
Thank you, Eric. It's such important information, and this will be included in our virtual safety catalog as well. I realize we have probably 30 seconds left, but there's an important question that was asked that I want to just directly ask for the three of you as we close out. How do you balance safety education with keeping a student calm and not triggering fear and anxiety, which are already a constant issue? So how do we give the information to somebody who's already at a heightened place? And I'm not sure who wants to start with that. Lisa, did you want to address that one maybe?
I think if at all possible, visually or written would help. Words are difficult if you're highly anxious.
I would also say not, as Lisa pointed out early, not only the words, your aura, right? Whatever you're giving off, all the nonverbals can be completely overwhelming to people, especially I'm passionate. So I know this about myself. I'm usually popular with folks with autism, but I'm not always popular because I give off just way too much sensory, right? So when you're a Pollock, you move your hands a lot, right off the bat. I've got to put them in my pockets, so.
Yeah, just to expand a little bit on what he's saying, what you model, you teach. And so if you're coming at them like, this is a very serious, intense thing that you must learn, that's going to, and here's the kicker with that too, is you can't just act like you're calm, because if you're not also calm on the inside, they will pick up on that. And so this is where beliefs come into play as well. If you're stepping into that situation already feeling anxious because you're like, God, I don't want to make the kids more anxious, I don't want to get them more worked up, they're picking up on that. And so, you really have to check yourself first and be comfortable and know what you want to put off and actually be that.
That's a great point. It really is.
Well, I don't have any other questions in the chat. I do want to thank everyone for being here. Our panelists, you all have such important information to share from your personal stories that are incredibly powerful, insightful, and transparent. Thank you for your honesty and for being raw with us. And for everybody who's here present as well, whether you're watching it live or you're watching the recording, because these are hard topics and we need to be talking about them. We need to be helping people to identify where they're struggling and put some of these strategies in place to help, support safety. So thank you for your
And then let me say
commitment.
too, real quick, we do have a lot more solutions. I mean, we today was you kind of reveal that, right? So please, we can do this again and really get in the solutions part because we can really bring people down without those. So.
Absolutely. We already had an email chat of we could have a whole session focused on just questions, right? So look for more to come. To that point, please stay plugged in with our safety efforts. Thank you for being here, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.